Hi again, Mark here from Talkingbass. This week we're going to look at a very basic aspect of just harmony in the shape of secondary dominant chords. Now I'm going to assume two things before we start. One is a basic knowledge of chords and chord construction. So you need to know the basics of triad and seventh chord construction. So if I say what are the notes in a C major 7 chord, you know it's C, E, G and B, which we can play as an arpeggio or as a chord. I'm also assuming a knowledge of the basic diatonic chords in a major key. So in the key of C major, let's say, we have the triads C major, D minor, E minor, F major, G major, A minor and B diminished. Or as seventh chords, they would be C major 7, D minor 7, E minor 7, F major 7, G7, A minor 7 and B minor 7 flat 5. Now, if you don't understand any of that stuff that I just said, then I've linked to a couple of lessons that I previously made that'll get you all up to speed. But if you do, then we can start with the good old secondary dominant chord. So what is a dominant chord? Well, you may think that it means dominant 7 chord, and that's partly true, but there's a lot more to it than that. So if we take just a basic major scale like a C major, we've got the notes in there, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then we're back to the C. And if we number those notes from 1 to 7, we get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So that's C is 1, D is 2, E is 3, F is 4, G is 5, A is 6, and B is 7. So that's the scale degrees, okay? So we're labeling them by number. But we can also label them with various names. And those names are, 1 is tonic, 2 is the supertonic, 3 is the mediant, 4 is the subdominant, 5 is the dominant, or 6 there is the submediant, and the 7th is the leading tone, okay? So don't worry too much about all those names in there. The main ones that you really need to be aware of are the tonic and the dominant, and they're the ones that you will have probably heard of. So all you have to think is, in those scale degrees, 1, the first, is tonic, and 5 is the dominant. So this is why we call the dominant 7 chord the dominant 7 chord. If we take a key like C major and we build a chord on that 5th degree, so building on G there, we stack those thirds, we get G, B, D and F, which you can see there is a major triad with a flattened 7th on the top. So root, major 3rd, perfect 5th, and that flat 7. That chord there, that only appears on chord 5. We get major 7 chords on chords 1 and 4. We get the minor 7s on the 2, the 3 and the 6, but we only have that dominant 7 chord there on chord 5. Now, there's a very special relationship between the chords on the tonic and the dominant degrees. The dominant to tonic chord progression is also called a perfect cadence, and it's the most common cadence in Western music. When I talk about cadence, I mean a chord progression signaling the end of a phrase or a section or, even a piece. It's basically a resolution back to our home, which is the tonic. So in the key of C major, we have the tonic is C major, and we've got the dominant chord, which is chord 5, the G major, and we can hear that G moving back to the C. So we have, okay, so if I put it into a bit more of a chord progression, there's the G and back to the C. So that's the dominant to tonic chord progression, the perfect cadence. Now, there are other types of cadence, but that chord 5 to chord 1 has a huge amount of tension and resolution, and a lot of that is down to the major 3rd in that chord 5. The 3rd of that G7 there is B, okay? So if we look at the key of C major, C, D, E, F, G, A, B, we can see there that 3rd of chord 5 is our leading note. It's the 7th in relation to the whole key. So if I was to play up through a C major scale, and I hang around on that B, you can hear that it wants to resolve. Okay? And that is there in that chord 5, which is why we get that sound of that perfect cadence. So that's the dominant chord and the dominant 7. But what is a secondary dominant chord? Well, that's where we play a dominant 7 chord on a scale degree other than the 5th. So in the key of C major, C7, D7, E7, F7, A7, B7 would all be secondary dominant chords. Okay, so that makes sense, but why would we use secondary dominants? Well, that's where the 5-to-1 perfect cadence comes into play. As we've seen, the dominant leads nicely into chord 1, the tonic. So a secondary dominant can be used to give a strong pull into another chord in the key as if it were a tonic, so a temporary tonic, as it were. So let's look at a simple example, a basic 1-6-2-5 in the key of C major. So that's C major 7, A minor 7, D minor 7 and G7, which is the basis for the popular rhythm changes or I got rhythm progression. And all of these chord shapes that I'm going to use here can be found over at Talkingbass, so just click on the link in the info below if you want to play along. I won't waste time on the actual notes here in the chords. I've got lessons on those, and like I say, you can just check out the tab, or sheet music. So we've got C major 7, A minor 7, D minor 7, and G7. Okay, so C major 7, A minor 7, D minor 7, G7, and back to C. So in that progression, we've already got our single dominant 7 chord, the G7 there, chord 5. So let's try putting some secondary dominants in there to see how they sound. So first of all, let's just change that A minor 7 to an A7, okay? So let's see how that sounds. So here it is without the A7, so this is just an A minor 7. And now let's put the A7 in there. Okay, so you can hear there that it has a certain flavour. That A7 leads nicely into that D minor 7. So apart from just giving you the general pull into that D minor 7, it's got a kind of jazzy, bluesy kind of flavour in there. Okay, so that was the A7. Now let's try changing the D minor 7, the chord 2, we'll change that to a dominant 7 chord. So this is going to be D7. So we'll change the A minor 7 back. So we've got C major 7, A minor 7, but then for D7, okay, to the G7. So again, I'll play through both. So first of all, with D minor 7 and then with D7. Okay, so. And now. Okay, so we're not really moving out of the key, you know, yes, it's a dominant 7 chord, it's a chord 5 temporarily, but we're still in C major, you know, we've not moved key, this isn't a, we've not modulated, we've just got more pull into that chord 5 there from the chord 2, okay? So now let's try going completely crazy and changing the A and the D both to secondary dominant. So this is going to be C major 7, A7, D7, and G7. So a lot of dominant 7s in there. So that sounds like this. Again. Okay, so again, like I say, we're still in C major all the way through there. They're just chromatic chords. We're just changing the third in each of those minor 7s to a major third. That's all we've done. And it just gives us more of that pull into the next chord. Now, you might also see secondary dominant chords on chord 1 moving through to chord 4. And these are really, really popular in loads of styles of music, but the example I'm going to give is a little bit of a doo-wop kind of progression, which would sound like this. Chord 4. Okay, so like I say, a very, very common chord progression. Now, secondary dominant chords are incredibly popular in all styles of music, but they're especially popular in a lot of jazz standards. So let's have a look at the changes to the tune All of Me. So this is a really popular jazz standard. So I'll just work through the chords there. So we're in the key of C major and we start on a C. So that's good old chord 1, so that's diatonic. But then we instantly move to E7. Now, in the key of C major, that should be an E minor 7. So there, straight away, we've got a secondary dominant chord on E, which then moves through to chord 6, which is A7. So once again, that should have been an A minor 7, but instead we've got an A7. So again, that's a secondary dominant on chord 6. Then we move through to D minor 7, which just good old chord 2. Then again, we're at E7, which is the secondary dominant on chord 3 again. Then we move to chord 6, this time A minor 7, so that's normal, that's just the standard chord 6, no secondary dominant there. Then we move to D7, which is chord 2, so that should be a D minor 7, but no, we got a secondary dominant. Then it moves to D minor 7, normal chord 2, followed by G7, which is chord 5. So there's a lot of secondary dominants in that first section there. Now, bear in mind, you don't need to use a dominant 7 chord necessarily to imply that secondary dominant function. You can do exactly the same thing by changing minor triads to major triads. So if we have another look at that 1, 6, 2, 5 progression in C major, we could play them as triads. So chord 1 would be C major, chord 6 would be A minor, chord 2 would be D minor, and chord 5 would be G major. So I'm only using G major there, not G7. So let's change those to secondary dominants by just changing them to major. So we could have C major, then A major. So that is now performing a secondary dominant function, moving to the D minor. Or we could also change the D minor to a D major. So C major, A minor, D major to G major. So even though they're not dominant 7 chords, they are still secondary dominants. Triads don't give a stronger secondary dominant feel as the 7th versions, but they are still secondary dominant in nature, like I said. This can be confusing to some people when analysing chord progressions, especially in some pop tunes. A major triad might appear where you expect a minor triad, and it's sometimes just a result of creating that dominant to tonic pull temporarily. So please like this video, leave a comment and subscribe to the channel to get updates on all the weekly releases. Remember, all of the material and tab is available over at Talkingbass, so just click on the link in the info below, and while you're there, remember to check out the lesson map where you'll find hundreds more lessons on every topic imaginable, and then just subscribe to the free membership for free to gain access to a ton of other lesson resources. Okay, I'll see you next week.